Hello, everybody, and good afternoon. Welcome, one and all, to ESN. We're here in Rockingham, North Carolina, for the AWSCO Windows Cup Series as the season continues and heads towards the finale next week at Homestead, Miami. We're here to finally decide which 5 drivers, after 38 races so far, at the end of the 39th year, we will decide the 5 drivers that will compete for the championship here at Homestead next week. We started out with a grid of 20 cars, with 20 drivers at the beginning of the playoffs all the way back in North Wilkesboro. Narrowed that down to 15 after Watkins Glen, down to 10 after Martinsville, and here we are at Rockingham Speedway, the recently revived Mile Oval venue in North Carolina, not too far away from what is effectively the U.S.'s version of Motorsports Valley in North Carolina. Very much the hub of all stock car racing in North America. As we're here for the Subway 400, 394 laps separate us and our 10 playoff drivers from knowing whether or not they will be in a position to compete for the championship at Homestead. I'm Rasha. Welcome to the FanDuel Fan Studio here for the pre-race show. I'm joined by Ellie. Well, after what we saw in the previous event, the Continental Series race, also here at Rockingham, there's a lot of notes I feel like we can take out of this race. But knowing the nature of this track, how strategy heavy it is, but also how prone it is to having race-altering cautions that disrupt the multiple pit cycles that we are bound to have at this track. How do you think these Cup teams are going to be looking at this situation? How do you think they're going to handle? How they're going to tackle the intricacies of getting around the pit cycles, trying to minimize the time they lose and hopefully find themselves in a contending spot? Because as we saw in the Continental race, it is so easy to find yourself trapped 1 or 2 laps down and kind of find yourself for a little bit out of contention for the race win. And while the point situation in the Continental Series wasn't as bad, wasn't as tight as it could have been, in the Cup Series it is quite close, I would say. It is quite close in places, I would say, considering that section from Abbey Little to Unia Waterton. Very close, 13 points up Little over the cut line. Waterton only 17 below the cut line. It's a little bit more top heavy here. The top 3 drivers are all pretty much in, barring a complete catastrophe. But those final 2 spots, it is, I think, it's anyone's game really heading into this race, I feel like. What do you think? How do you think these teams are going to tackle this challenge?
Yeah, it is anyone's race, and it's going to be a competitive and hard-fought race. I think going into this, the best teams who have the best strategy are going to be trying to go for that overcut. The undercut didn't seem to give you much of an advantage, and it seemed like the longer you stayed out and, drove your tires to the worst condition they could be without, falling apart, the better you were coming off of a green cycle. So I think what we're going to really see is the best drivers with their best teams, whoever is out there who has a good strategy, they're going to be trying to go for the overcut. I don't think the undercut is the best option. Sure, I mean, maybe it could work at some point, but I think the overcut is the main strategy to try and go for here. And I think we're going to see a lot of drivers going for it. And I think that's obviously to say, reiterating it again, but I think obviously to say that tire strategy is going to be the biggest thing here.
Yeah, I think these teams are going to be looking to balance it out a little bit. Obviously, the undercut is going to be the strategy that gets you the immediate pace, but that does seem to be, as we saw in the Continental race, that does leave you vulnerable to those cautions, which will trap you at least a lap down. I feel like. We saw in the Continental race, I should say, the overcut, while not necessarily being the fastest outright, I feel like does give you that balance of both tire life and outright pace, because it does mean that later on in the second run, that does give you the pace to kind of go on the initiative and start attacking later on. Whereas if you come in as early as possible, that'll give you the position of strength initially, but you'll be kind of in that vulnerable. You'll be vulnerable for the rest of the run. You're gonna have to play defense the rest of the way until you get to the next pit cycle. And I feel like some of these teams might be looking to stay at least a little bit later, maybe try to go in the middle of the run, not necessarily staying out as long as possible and letting those tires run out, the tire life run out. But I feel like maybe striking a little balance, going in kind of in the middle of the pack. Although I say that kind of comes with its own caveats, because pit lane here can be a little bit crowded. It is a fairly tight pit lane, so there is definitely the chance of pit lane mishaps also coming into light here. Another thing that we want to bring up here with Rockingham Speedway, of course, it being a mile oval, and it's a fairly irregularly shaped one. I wouldn't say it's irregularly shaped per se. It is a fairly standard D-shaped oval, but with the way the pit lane is staggered on the racetrack, it's not symmetrical. Pit lane entry and exit aren't really symmetrical with the front stretch as it would be on another example of a track that's like a little over a mile but is not quite a 1.5 mile, that being Nashville Super Speedway kind of racetrack. Here, of course, pit lane exit is right on the exit of 4, and entry takes you basically to the middle of turn 2. So that's kind of another thing that's kind of a point of concern for these teams. Pit lane exit, especially with the multi-lane, with that kind of race, with that kind of a part of the track being played was very treacherous, I think, in the Continental race. Most of our incidents happened as a result of cars kind of running into each other, trying to get to pit lane during those pit cycles, and that's kind of the thing that's tripping up these drivers. But Rockingham Speedway, of course, a high banked speedway oval, a very tricky racetrack that we always like to mention. It does kind of like to prey on inexperienced drivers, but I'd say these Cup drivers have a bit more experience. But that's not necessarily the case for all of them. Some of these drivers are still fairly new to stock car racing, but they do have nearly a full season of top level stock car racing under their belt now. So we'll see if that kind of helps them out a little bit more. But yeah, it's a very high bank racetrack, so it is fairly quick as in terms of speed. I made the comparison yesterday in the pre-race show to Calder Park. Of course, these drivers will have experience racing at that track, as we did visit the oval in Australia earlier on this season, all the way back in February, in the second round of the race, so of the season, I should say. So these drivers will have a little bit more experience working with this kind of mile oval plus heavy tire wear kind of combination that we also saw at Calder Park earlier this season. So that's, I think, something to look out for. Some of these drivers will have kind of a little bit. All of these drivers will have at least some sort of idea, I think, of how to handle this track.
Yeah, I think that is definitely correct, and I think another thing to watch out for is obviously the playoff drivers and where they qualified. A lot of them qualified pretty solidly, and some of them are surprises, some of them not so much. Well, I wouldn't necessarily say surprises, more so just a continued kind of lock-in.
Mm-hmm.
And I think what's going to be the biggest thing between those drivers is they're probably going to want to see some distance between each other at some point, whether they're behind a decent amount behind or a decent amount in front.